And welcome back into the class here. I hope that your mind's been refreshed, because we're going to deal with a very powerful thought here as we come to this thought of the cross. I'm going to read in James chapter 1 verse 18. Of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creature. Then turn into 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 20. But now is Christ risen from the dead, and become the first fruits of them that slept. Verse 18 of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. Verse 20, and having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself. By him I say, whether there be things in earth or things in heaven. Then again in Matthew 16:24, then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, as you read these and put them all together, you understand what's happening. You and I, as the children of God, are invited to be a part of the first fruit. Now, first fruit is the sweetest and most tender of all of the fruit. According to 1 Corinthians 15 and 20, Jesus is the first fruit of all who died. He came up first. Now, the giving of the first fruit in the Old Testament was the waving of those fruits before the Lord as the promise of that which was to come, which was Christ, offering up the sacrifice. They waved that first fruit before God. That was just testimony of yet a harvest that was to come. Much more out there going to be gathered in. But symbolically, it was talking about Christ coming. Now, Paul wrote that Christ was the first fruit. Now, understand, he is the first fruit. Out of that first fruit has come the harvest of all of us, all of us. So he is the first fruit of those raised from the dead, and then was a type of those who were to come, just as the waving of that first fruit of the harvest of the Old Testament signal that we're going to have a harvest. There's a lot more coming. Now, the priest of the Old Testament had the privilege of eating the first fruit. Now, those of us who take up this privilege of being the first fruit to be waved, that is to go first, that is the invitation. We're invited to go first. The first wave must die, always. They went out there and cut that first wave to be waved. They went out there and cut it. It had to die. We who have been invited to be this first wave, amen, are invited to die. If we accept the invitation of being first, we shall surely eat of the first fruit. What we taste will be sweeter than what others taste. We must know there can be no fruit in our life until we understand the death of Jesus and the death of our own life. Now, of all the lessons we deal with revival, this one, as much as any, must register on your heart, not just your mind. It must register on your heart. First fruit is produced through the cross of Christ and the wonder of his resurrection. Now, the invitation to be first fruit is an invitation to live the cross. To share Christ's glory is to share Christ's suffering. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 23 through 25. Now, in the cross we have everything. That which produces fruit, life out of death. That which is wisdom. That which produces power, Matthew 28:18. And that which overcomes the world. True revival only comes to people and through people who understand suffering and are willing to take up the cross. So let us just look here. Hold just a moment while we look. We're invited to be those first fruits. Now notice, we don't have to go any further back. We're invited to be the first fruit. Now, we're invited to eat of that first fruit. But we must understand, in the Old Testament, they went out and gathered in that first fruit of the harvest, and they came and waved it before the people, the priest did. But he was able to eat. That fruit was his. The best of the harvest, the first was here. But understood that first fruit had to die. It is testimony that more is coming. Christ, as the first fruit, had to die. In his resurrection came the rest of this harvest. Now, if you and I are praying for revival, be sure this will be a part of it. If we reign with him, we'll suffer with him. If we're to be partakers of that first fruit, it means we must die. We must come to Luke 22:42. Not my will, but thine. That is a testimony. If Christ be not risen, Paul said, your faith is vain. Without death, there can be no resurrection. In Gethsemane, Jesus was overwhelmed with sorrow. We don't know how long Jesus was in such a state. Perhaps a long time. The Bible said the disciples fell asleep. He went through the agony 3 times. This was, listen to it, this was, am I really going to do what the Father wants me to do? Be sure he knows what the cost is. He knows that cross. He was born to die. He went through that agony 3 times. And it was, am I really going to do what the Father wants me to do? We too must face our Gethsemanes. If you allow the cross of Christ to work in you, your soul also will come to a place where it is overwhelmed with sorrow. You will face a decision that'll cost you everything to obey. We've brought this out. We've talked about this. We must press it on your mind. If you're going to be a part of this, if you're going to be that one of them few that are chosen, you are going to come to a place, a decision, where it is going to cost you everything to obey. That is how God invites us to make him known to the world. Oh, I want God to make this real to every one of you. To live the cross is to press on in death until there is resurrection. Life comes out of death. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 12. Now, Jesus' goal was to die. This is the reason that he came. I had the sentence of death upon me. I had broken the law. That law said I had to die. It cannot be broken. Jesus came to die in my place. Our friends begged him that day not to go to Jerusalem. They knew Herod desired to kill him. But his answer to the plea of those that loved him was, go tell that fox that I will cast out demons, and on the third day I will reach my goal. And in any case, I will keep going today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside Jerusalem. Luke chapter 13 and verse 32. Now all the way through, his life was heading for death. He was living for the cross. All the way through, his life is heading there. His ultimate objective was to die. Now listen, the resurrection was the Father's responsibility. The dying Jesus chose. I have authority to lay down my life. He chose to die. He left the resurrection in the hands of the Father. Now you can see we have the signs, the wonders, the power evangelism that is to bring in the nations. The Father will do that. Oh, please hear me. If you and I will choose the dying, this is our part. I said, this is our part. If we will choose the dying, God will see that those signs and wonders and power evangelism is there. It will work. Ours is to choose the dying. God's is the resurrection. So the appeal of God then is to this direction. Matthew 10:32, listen to this. Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Matthew 10:34, think not that I'm come to send peace in the earth. I come not to send peace, but a sword. Verse 35, for I'm not come to set a man at variance against his father. Back that up. Let me reread this. For I am come, I knew I'd insert it, to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not up his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it. He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. You choose the dying. God takes care of the resurrection. There is a fundamental difference between the appeal of a mass movement and the appeal of a practical organization. The practical organization, religiously or otherwise, offers opportunity for self-advancement. It appeals mainly to self-interest. Christianity has reduced itself to this. Most appeals are to greed. But the appeal of Christianity, or rather of Christ, particularly in its revival phase, is to those who crave to be rid of an unwanted self, those who will choose death. All mass movements attract and hold a following, not because it can satisfy the desire for self-advancement, but because it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. The poor heard him gladly. People who see their lives as spoiled cannot find a worthwhile purpose in self-advancement. The gospel is so structured that when it is faithfully proclaimed, brings men to this place of seeing self as it is. To such people, the prospect of an individual career cannot stir them to a mighty effort, nor can it evoke in them the faith and a single-minded dedication. Their innermost craving is for a new life, a rebirth, a sense of worth, and a purpose by an identification with a holy cause. It is here that people make their choice. Choose the death, leave the resurrection with the Father. Now, an active, Bible-centered, Spirit-filled church offers the opportunities for both. It is true that among the early adherents of a mass movement, there are also adventurers. Jesus had them, who joined for their own selfish interests. Ananias and Sapphira, two in case. When a revival movement begins to attract people who are interested in their own careers, then it's a sign that it's past its vigorous stage. It is no longer engaged in molding a new world, but is possessing and preserving the present. It ceases to be a movement and becomes an enterprise. The more posts and offices a movement has to hand out, the more inferior stuff it will attract. When this happens, the mission of such a movement is done for. Faith in God and His kingdom must fill the vacuum created by the lost faith in ourselves. It is here that we can choose the dying. The less justified a man is in claiming excellence for himself, the more ready he is to claim all excellence for his God and the cause. Now, the burning conviction that we have a holy duty toward others is a driving force of a revived church. Take away that conviction, and the church will dig trenches, just like Israel when David found them facing Goliath. One of the most potent attractions and appeals of the gospel is its offering of a substitute for individual hope. When our individual interests and prospects do not seem worth living for, we are in a desperate need of something apart from ourselves to live for. The gospel, in its truest sense, gives men and women such a hope. Now, when an individual or a society is ripe for the appeal of God, it is also ripe for every other mass movement's appeal. The moon is, communism, anything else. So all forms of self-dedication, devotion, loyalty, and self-surrender are in essence a desperate clinging to something which will give meaning to our futile and small lives. Hence, the embracing of a substitute will necessarily be passionate and extreme. We can have qualified faith in ourselves, but the faith we have in God and His cause has to be extravagant and uncompromising. A substitute embraced in moderation cannot supplant and efface the self that we are wanting to crucify. We cannot be sure that we have something worth living for unless we're ready to die for it. This readiness to die is evident to ourselves and to others that indeed this is the way. When I see this in myself, and others can see it, it is evident that I have come to that place, that I've chose to die. Said of those early apostles, they loved not their lives unto death. The Bible talks about being delivered from the fear of death, which they'd been in bondage to all of their lives. No man is ever free until he's free from that bondage of the fear of death. Who are the most likely converts to a move of God, or any appeal, as for that matter, of a mass movement? There is a tendency to judge a race, a nation, or a church by its least unworthy members. Though manifestly unfair, this tendency has some justification, for the character and destiny of a group are often determined by its inferior elements. The inert mass of a nation, for instance, is the middle class, the decent, average people who do the work, pay the taxes, and are worked upon and shaped by the minutiae at both ends, the best and the worst. Now, the superior individual plays a large role in shaping a nation, but so do individuals at the other extreme, the failures, misfits, outcasts, criminals, all those who have lost their footing or never had it in the first place in the ranks of respectable humanity. The game of history is usually played by the best and the worst, and it's played over the heads of the majority in the middle. The reason the inferior elements of a nation can exert a marked influence on it is because they're wholly without reverence for the present. The mark of a true believer is that person who is willing to sacrifice the present for the future. When we have no faith here except the will of God, then we become prime targets to be a part of what God is doing. These people crave to lose their spoiled lives in some spectacular communal action. These are all potential converts to any movement that offers hope. The discarded and rejected are often the raw material for a mighty sweeping move of God. The stone the builders rejected becomes the cornerstone of a new move. It is not the irony of history that the undesired in the countries of Europe crossed an ocean to build a new world on this continent. Only they could do it. Only they could do it. You and I, God's appeal to us is, come and give me your life. If you save it, you're going to lose it. But if you lose it, you'll save it unto life eternal. There has to come that dissatisfaction. That there has to be that extravagant faith in God. That I am willing to sacrifice, to give myself for this cause that I have become a part of. They love not their lives unto death. God, give us such people in this school, and we'll jar this earth with the gospel of Christ. God bless you. We come back, we're going to continue right on with this thought of revival. We're dealing, with particular aspects that will promote it or stop it. And I'm trusting that God is going to put in us what has to be there and deliver us from what should be removed. We are the instruments God desires to use to reap the harvest of the earth just prior to His coming. Stand with me and let's praise God together.